evening. Well, it's this time of week again, and we've got the Shoesbiller show. We've got some great guests coming up. It's really interesting to have Philippa Whitford, our local MP, and Joe Cullinane, the leader of the council, North Ayrshire Council, and it'll be lovely to have them with us and hear from them. Willie, how you doing?
Fine, Neil. It's not really business as usual, is it? It's one thing to get back to business on a Sunday night and have the show, but it's getting back to business is proving pretty difficult in terms of the churches, and certainly business as usual seems to be a long way off. There's a question as to whether or not we would want to get back to business as usual, or would we want to press the reset button and do something else? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some resetting going on. The danger is that we just go back to our wild, wacky ways as before, and I think we have to learn from all of this. And I'm sure Philippa and Joe will be helping us think a bit more about that, as have our previous guests in our previous shows. That was Chubby Checker. Let's twist again, like we did last summer. We always come into a dance song, and yeah, it's a golden oldie. You can't help but at least tap your feet, if not start twisting your knees as you listen to that. How's your exercise? Well, are you still getting out and about?
Yeah, every day for a walk. I'm ambitious to do a bit more than that. I would really love to be getting on a bike and so on and so forth. So hopefully that will be on the to-do list. But it's great to have the time to exercise. That's the most important thing of all. There's time when you can definitely say, I know I can exercise at some point today, so it's going to be factored in. Whereas if you're not disciplined about it, believe it or not, there's never enough time to exercise, which of course isn't true, but just the way it goes. And how about you? Out on the bike regularly?
Yeah, still out on the bike. Really grateful for the chance to get out in that and into the Ayrshire Hills. It's been really great. Loving it. I've got my bike back, actually. It was in quarantine. It was in the bicycle shop when the lockdown came on, and I was 5 weeks without it. But I was quite enjoying using my boy's bike. He got a new using the new bike, and but it was him said, "Dad, you're using my bike too much. Get your own bike." So he phoned up to make sure that I got my own bike back, which was good of him. So I'm back on my lighter giant bike. So that means I'm going a wee bit quicker.
Are you counting every blessing as you go along?
Oh, there's so much to be grateful for, really, isn't there? And that's one of the things about mental health and spiritual well-being. The attitude of gratitude is critical. If we're able to be grateful, if we're able to see what we have rather than moan and groan about what we don't have, it lifts our head, it lifts our heart, and we realise how blessed we are. So we're gonna listen to the Wren Collective. Counting every blessing. Well, are you looking forward to our guests coming in, Willie?
Oh, yeah. First of all, they're both very good speakers. I think that's the most important thing. Listening to Philippa and Joe in any forum and basically in any subject has been very worthwhile over the years. But I think more importantly, they're able to put meat on the bone of the things that need to be done. So I'm hoping they'll come up with some good ideas. I've heard them say before, don't rebuild the wall, build a door. And that kind of stuff is fine and well. But the wonderful thing about the likes of Philippa and Joe is they'll tell us how to do it. These are the things that we need to put in place so that we're not building a wall, but building a way of going between places rather than being divided. And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Be good. And we're going to come into Joe's first of two songs, which I'm sure is not his era. We'll maybe find out a wee bit more about that, how he's chosen the jam in a town called Malice. Let's listen.
Well, good evening. Welcome to our two special guests this evening. We've been looking forward to these guests for a long time now. We seem to say that in every show, Neil, but I think in a very special way. Everybody will appreciate why we're looking forward to this evening's guests. They're Joe Cullinane, the leader of the council, and Philippa Whitford, our Member of Parliament. So welcome to Joe and Philippa.
Hi there. Hi, how you doing?
Good, great to see you both. And congratulations to yourself, Joe, on parenthood again.
Yes.
Tell us a wee bit what that's like to have another child in the household.
Well, hopefully you can't hear the screaming at the moment in the background. Baby Caitlin's just been getting fed, but I suppose it's a bit of a strange time for everybody, but to bring another child into the world at this time is obviously particularly strange, pretty difficult when family members and that can't come and just do the normal sort of thing and then meet the Caitlin and hold her and have that sort of kind of bonding that you have at that sort of age. So there is difficulties in it, but to be honest, Neil, it's pretty good to have some positive news at the minute. There's so much that's worrying and concerning for people, so being able to even just share a bit of personal positive news is always nice. And I think the most important thing is you'll be aware is people's health, and Caitlin's healthy, mum's healthy, and big sister Rosie's healthy and loving having Caitlin in the house, so it's all good.
Lovely. And Philippa, family-wise, how have things been with yourselves?
Well, thankfully, we're all keeping well. My son is back here in Troon and out of London, which I'm quite happy. So he's just working away on his dissertation, bit like a teenager, falls out of bed, disappears into his workroom, and we see him at mealtime. So a bit of a kind of flashback for us. We're at the other end of the child scale from Joe, but thankfully everybody in this house keeping well, and my mum keeping well, because she's in her 80s, and obviously that's a real concern with COVID in the way that it hits older members of the population. So I'm delighted that she's stayed well, thank God.
Well, that's good news. Good news. And Joe, we just came into the jam there. Tell us, are you a jam man? Are you?
I inherited that, Neil, from my dad. My dad's a big jam fan, so whenever Paul Weller comes to Scotland, me and my dad tend to go and try and see him. And obviously, we're unable to do stuff like that just now, but it's an uplifting song called Malice. So.
Willie,
unfortunately, Joe has just made me feel really, really ancient. In that, I had the jam when I was a student. I had the first time around. So thanks for that, Joe.
Well,
You're welcome.
I remember the mods and the rockers coming to Largs and noising it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never heard of them, of course.
No, you're too young, aren't you?
but the wonderful thing about the things you're speaking about already is it puts a fresh perspective on life, doesn't it? When a new baby comes along, when you're looking out for your elderly parents, when you have your family all around you. To what extent has the coronavirus changed your perspective?
I think it's changed everybody's kind of perspective about how they go about their day-to-day business and just their life. I think hopefully at the end of it there will be a sort of return to a more kind of kind society and people thinking about the collective rather than just the individual. And I think you can see some of that happening already with the way that people have came together to volunteer and support their neighbours, their elderly relatives, and other people who are obviously shielding because they're vulnerable at this time. So I'm just hoping that there is that sort of return to a more kind of collective view of how society should come together and tackle some of these big challenges.
Philippa, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, obviously having spent 33 years working as a breast cancer surgeon, it's always been really clear to me that there are only two things important in life. One is towards the end of life, or when you're faced with a life-threatening illness, you wish you had your health. You wish you'd valued it more when you were younger. You wish you'd looked after it. You maybe even wish you'd enjoyed it more. And the other thing is the people you love. And yet, so much of our society, our decision-making is around other things. And, there has been an attempt in Scotland to move to more putting well-being at the centre. Scotland was the founder of the Wellbeing Economy Government's global group with New Zealand and Iceland, but it's a hard slog. I think what you will see is a greater openness to that. We're already seeing things like universal basic income, which in Joe's council is one of the trial areas for that. There's things that are on the agenda now, finally, that people just weren't willing to consider. the economy has been stopped in its tracks. What kind of economy do we want to rebuild? You know, a consumerist or a sustainable one based on individual wealth or inclusion, you know, on inequality or unfairness. So I think there's a chance to actually say, right, okay, the wall fell down. Are we going to build the wall up again, or are actually going to build a gate that everyone is invited through?
I think we're all nodding there, aren't we? And as we were chatting earlier, just in the preliminary, there's a real sense in which things cannot go back to the same. Can you talk us through your imagining and anticipating the major differences that we must take on board and apply? Joe?
I think that the contribution here for Philippa and the sort of issue about returning back to business as usual is actually pretty timely for us in North Ayrshire as well, because we've just launched our community wealth building strategy, which is the first community wealth building strategy in the whole of Scotland. And that is about changing how we do economic development and turning it on its head. It's looking at not just doing that traditional economic development where you're trying to attract inward investment and you get a big kind of global multinational company comes in, but actually what is the wider societal benefits to that investment, because a lot of it's extractive. So we want to see how we can use procurement, for example, to spend more with local businesses. We want to see how we can use economic development to create more inclusive forms of business, so cooperatives, social enterprises, employee ownership. The council and the public sector have huge swathes of land and assets, so rather than just seeing that as something that you sell off to bridge a budget gap, how do we use that for the common good? How do we make sure that we're able to transfer some of the ownership of that to community groups, to cooperatives, and see how we can put that back into productive use for the people in the communities of North Ayrshire? So that's a really timely discussion, and I think that in terms of the thinking around about community wealth building, the stuff that we've done before on inclusive growth, we're at the forefront of that sort of new economy thinking in North Ayrshire. And I think that some of the ideas that we've got, hopefully, will start to spread out across other areas of the country, and we will see a new kind of economy being built and designed over the coming weeks and months, because I think it's absolutely necessary. The fragility of the current system's been exposed by COVID. It wasn't working before, and it certainly won't work post-COVID-19.
Philippa?
Well, I think, you know, we had decades of the narrative of the trickle-down economy. If you make wealthy people wealthier, they spend it, and everybody gets, you know, little bits. But actually, everybody gets crumbs from the table, and sometimes it just never trickled down. You need to be looking at trickle-up economics. If you imagine an economic pyramid, you know, the largest number of people are ordinary people. The number of millionaires are a tiny number at the top of that. So it's trying to actually get that money, fairness, comfort, getting rid of the people who fall through the gaps and are living in poverty, not just helps them. So this is the idea of the universal basic income. And I know the pilots will often be of pockets of money that is too small to eliminate poverty. But if you're actually talking about amounts that are bigger than our current measly state pension, then you start to take away want. You actually go back to the idea that Joe mentioned there, the common good. We used to have common good land. We used to have shared pasture so that everyone could actually manage to keep a few animals. The idea is putting that money in so that you don't have people reduced to absolute penury. But what that also does is re-stimulate local economies. There's often too much focus on, well, what does the City of London think? You know, what's happening in the big multinationals that Joe referred to? But actually, we all live in our local economy, in our local town. Can you afford to buy a joint from the butcher? If you can, him and his wife are going out on a Saturday night for a drink and a meal. That's employing someone else. Can you buy a new cardigan? Somebody's making that. Now, it may all be the money ends up with the wealthy in the end, but if you're going to restart the economy, you have to put that money into the hands of ordinary people, and it has to be in local economies. So both from an economic point of view and a well-being point of view, it's getting money to ordinary people is going to be critical coming out of this.
Well, Philippa, very appropriately, the first piece of music you've chosen is Erbarme dich, Lord have mercy, from Bach's St Matthew's Passion. Do you want to say a wee word of introduction to that piece of music? Why did you choose it?
Well, it was my German husband Hans who got me involved in listening to Baroque music. I would say Bach is my all-time favourite composer. When we worked in Gaza as volunteers, we had taken our, CDs and things, and it was amazing how much Western music, whether classical or modern, you just couldn't play. It just didn't fit. Whereas Bach is so spiritual, you can play it anywhere. And for me, in times of crisis, this has often reduced me to tears. And then I normally play the closing chorale of the Passion, which is a lullaby and is comforting. But the sheer emotion in this, and I think there are so many people, whether due to loss or kind of struggles they're in, are really struggling at the moment. And this piece of music, I think, reflects that.
A really moving piece of music, and emotions are strong across lots of different fronts, especially where people are having to come to terms with loss, whether it be the loss of a loved one, the loss of ability, the loss of a business, the loss of many things. And I suppose we're very much aware of that. You'll be very much aware of that. We're aware of it in terms of pastoral care. But one of the things that clearly has been happening is there has been a real rallying of care and concern for one another, a neighbourly love. One of the things that's coming out from our phone calls around our parishioners is that the people next door are looking out for one another. Of course, there's also I'm afraid also the phoning the police. Look, my neighbour's spending 2 hours out or 3 hours out or whatever it is. That there is a bit of that, unfortunately, too. But have you been aware, in terms of politics, of a greater willingness to listen to each other, of neighbourliness? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think to some extent, obviously there are big things around Brexit, the Scottish Constitution, etc., that have been set aside largely in this, because this is threatening everybody. What I've certainly seen is, I mean, it's not totally happened within politics, and maybe that was unlikely, but I think, just echoing what you were saying, I mean, there will be elderly people who are actually having more contact at the moment than they normally do. They live alone, and actually their neighbour is coming and chapping the window or chatting to them over the hedge or offering to get shopping. Now, it's not that neighbour was, uncaring. They were just busy, they were doing other things, they assumed someone else was doing it. Whereas I think what's happening now is we're really seeing the community having to think about everything. And we've seen people rally. We've seen that community spirit is alive and well. I mean, Westminster-wise, I don't think that I expected things to change that dramatically there. Obviously, what we're now threatened with is that the hybrid parliament will be shut down next Wednesday, which seems bizarre for all the incredible effort of the digital teams to get up and running. And until yesterday, when Tommy Shepherd raised it, there was utterly no mentioning of the MPs who are over 70, those who are over 65, those who are in shielding groups for health reasons or vulnerable for other reasons. So you suddenly could have literally 50 or 100 MPs who would just be disenfranchised by that kind of sweeping decision without consultation. So in some things, there was a lot of consulting across the floor with opposition parties. And then in other things, stuff has just jumped out of a jack-in-the-box at us. So some things have changed, some things have stayed the same. That was probably to be expected.
Sure.
We're in a situation, Neil, where technology is able to bring people together, but in terms of how we bring the various members of the council together, it's been a bit more difficult for us in terms of the technology that we have available to do that. And I think what Philippa's highlighting there about that hybrid model is going to be absolutely key for us going forward. So if you think about the nature of local government, Philippa joked earlier on about my age. I think myself and people like Councillor Macaulay are of the younger scale of that, but there is a lot of councillors who are of a particular age. I won't mention any names. There's quite a few of them who are having to shield because of health conditions, etc. So we definitely do not envisage going back to a sort of business as usual model of council meetings anytime soon. We're working with various people to try and look at that hybrid model, which would allow, as restrictions are eased, people who are able to come in and be in the chamber to do so, but those who are having to stay at home being able to participate through technology. So that's been absolutely our key focus. But in terms of just the general kindness and how people are working together, I mean, look at what's happened in terms of the community hubs in North Ayrshire. Although sometimes it is more difficult for central government to put in place these sort of new services and sort of change the way that they operate, at local government level, we're the closest tier of government to local communities. And I think what's been shown is that we are able to be responsive and effective in terms of devising new services. In the first couple of days of the lockdown, we had established the community hubs. There was staff in there was volunteers going in and supporting it, and they were going out and doing prescription pickups, so we're doing phone calls and signposting people to other supports, so we're delivering food. And I think that just came about because people were just really keen to support their neighbours, their relatives, their community in general. And I think that sort of kindness has shone through in this. And our role as a council, I suspect, going forward, is to try and make sure that continues, that we don't let it go back to business as usual, that we do reset the relationship that we have between ourselves as a council, the community, and neighbours and residents and citizens in general. So we very much see that as being part of our renewal phase as we come out of lockdown.
It's a lovely move into your second song, Joe, which is called There Is a Power in a Union by Billy Bragg. Do you want to tell us why you've chosen that, please?
So just to clarify, that's not me going into a constitutional debate with Philippa Whitford. This is very much about the trade union movement, and as I said, about a time called malice. I've been brought up in the sort of trade union movement. I was a trade union member before I was a political party member, and I think that the reason I've chose this at this time is because I think that what we're seeing is very much that the trade unions are fighting for their members' interests throughout this current situation. We've seen a whole host of issues in terms of businesses and employers wanting members of staff to go in and work when they probably isn't safe to do so. They haven't got the proper social distancing in place. They've not got the proper PPE. And I think it's going to be even more important in the coming weeks and months as we do try and start to turn the tap back on in the economy and people do return to work, that we have a strong trade union movement which is there to actually support and fight for those interests. So I suppose that's why I've chose that song. It is a family favourite, so it is as well. But my message would be join a union and make sure that you've got somebody fighting your case as you start to get your employer asking you to get back to work.
Well, let's hear from Billy Bragg.
Tell us a wee bit about what you are able to do to kind of relax. Of course, it's hard. I suppose it's going out a walk with the wains. Possibly you're up to your oxters and nappies and what have you. But Philippa, we'll hear from you in a moment. Joe, what about yourself, Philippa? Are you able to get some relaxation in the midst of all this chaos?
Struggling with that a little bit because obviously the Parliament's been back, so I've been taking part in the virtual Parliament, obviously as health spokesperson, just studying research, speaking in statements, debates, etc. around the whole issue. So quite busy there, very busy constituency-wide, as Joe said just before the song. What we had, and particularly because the advice from Scottish Government and UK Government was different about what businesses were allowed to be open. As MPs, my team were getting like 500 emails a day initially, people falling through the gaps, people with no money or people being told to work, even though they had their partner was shielding, all of these kind of things. So We've actually been incredibly busy at a constituency level. I've been back involved with the NHS, which, as Joe had said earlier about, the community hubs and people really kind of coming at it with an energy. The redesign of the NHS and working with community and social care has been incredible. We've seen what happened in Italy. So there was a bit of a focus initially on, the hospitals have to redesign themselves. And that happened very fast, generating more critical care capacity. But when I went back into the NHS, we could already see from what was happening that this is a long haul. This isn't going to be over quickly. We know it hits the oldest and frailest, and therefore actually it's our home care and care home settings that are the most challenged. And I've been part of a project group that have been working on training, end of life support, making sure people have someone they can phone, making sure we're providing extra staff to care homes if they need it. So, Scotland's been trying to work on integration of health and social care for 6 years, and it's been a bit of a slog. And I think there's a recognition that we wish we'd got even further, would have helped us. And a lot of barriers that I can tell you, having spent all that time in the NHS, would have taken years to climb over, have simply fallen down. And so you've just got everybody coming at this problem with what do we need to do? So I'm kind of involved in that, doing quite a lot of media, so that doesn't leave a lot of other time. I get on my bike. With my bad leg, I can't go big long walks, so I get on my bike and get out and do a wee cycle round Troon, and that clears my head. A sight of the sea makes a big difference.
Sounds exhausting, and we appreciate all you're doing. What about yourself, Joe?
Similar to Philippa at the start, there was, I think, a real spike in people looking for advice and looking for sort of services and support through the community hubs and through the free school meal provision that we've put in place, etc. So there was a real spike in sort of casework and supporting local residents through that. But obviously, as well as that, we've had daily calls virtually in terms of the council's wider response to it, calls with various departments. And I think the interesting thing about technology is as well, you build up relationships in the job that you do with stakeholders or other groups across the country, and you often don't engage with them that very often in terms of that, because they're another part of the country. And technology through this has actually shown that it's so easy just to do what we're doing just now. We're all sitting in separate locations having this conversation, and that's been a major feature of our discussions as we do stuff like community wealth building and looking at the basic income feasibility study, and that we're all joining together in a way that we probably didn't before this. But in terms of how do I relax, I mean, my body's adapting to the broken sleeps during the night in terms of feeds and nappy changes, and I'm getting there. I need to get out and get a walk with not just Caitlin, but Rosie as well. As soon as you release her from the front door, she runs out with a burst of energy. So it's important to get her out as well. And to be honest, my sort of thing in the house is probably reading books. I don't watch too much Netflix or TV. So over the last few weeks, as the kids have settled down and went to sleep, I've managed to get through a fair amount of books in recent times, so it's pretty good.
We're exhausted as well, thinking about what you're up to, and we appreciate it very much. Willie?
There really needs to be the whole issue of inequality getting addressed somehow, because that seems to be next to care homes where the most disproportionate number of deaths happens to be. But equally, we need to have some sort of programme for reform that is about healing and not punishing. Just wondering what your thoughts are in those two areas. What do we do to try and address inequality in our country? What do we do to try and establish some format for reform that makes things better rather than leave some people suffering because of the reform that was put in place in the light of the coronavirus? What are your thoughts on that? Maybe with you first, Philippa, would that be okay?
Well, I do think that while obviously it's the pilot on universal basic income that Joe and North Ayrshire will be involved in, we've now had the report from Finland, which was actually much more positive than their interim report in mental health, in trust, in feeling part of a community, and people feeling that they had life choices. I think we need to change. I mean, we've got all this work between, you know, the NHS and social care and local government. We actually need to move to a focus on well-being. You know, the NHS would be called the National Illness Service, but, you know, it's not an attractive name to recruit people. We need to actually be looking at health and well-being are much more involved things that actually local government provides. So, but you can't enjoy any of those if constantly you're wondering where your next meal is coming from, how you can heat your home, or how you can keep a roof over your head. So I think that what we talked about earlier, getting you know, a survivable income for people all to have and get rid of abject poverty is critical to that. But beyond that, I think we need to start having a well-being approach to every single policy decision. How do we design our town centre? Is it around cars or is it around people? You know, what kind of homes do we build? Everything we should be thinking about. What is the long-term impact on the physical, mental and environmental well-being of whoever responsible for, whether it's in a town, a country, you know, the EU, whatever. So I would love to see that change put into a legal statutory requirement that people are focusing more on the genuine well-being of whoever, whichever group they're answerable to.
Joe?
Yeah, I mean, Philippa has mentioned basic income a few times, and we are obviously involved in that feasibility study at the moment, looking at a pilot. And I think the important thing about that is if you are going to put in place a sort of reform or change like basic income, it does need to be at a level which actually allows people to have a decent standard of living. I think the most kind of positive benefit that basic income could actually have is giving people more control over their lives. How they engage in the labour market, for example, could completely change if they had that unconditional monthly income coming in through a UBI. But if you don't pitch it at the right level, it could actually exacerbate existing inequalities. And if it didn't include additional supports like housing support and council tax reduction, etc., then you could actually make people a lot worse off if you don't get the model completely right. So I think that's the sort of work that we're involved in with Fife, Glasgow and Edinburgh, just looking at how that would work. But there is obviously other interventions that you can do in the economy. I mean, we could go back to a sort of approach that was looking at full employment. There's a lot of talk about stuff like a job guarantee, not just in the UK, but in America as well. It was a major part of Bernie Sanders' pitch to be the Democrat candidate for the presidential election later this year. So I think there are other interventions that you can put in place that looks to do some of that. And I think for us in the council, if you look at how we have started to support people in the provision of food and other stuff through the community hubs, I don't see that type of work ending anytime soon. So it will be about how do we look at changing that as we go through the various phases of easing the lockdown. And also, I mentioned earlier on, community wealth building, just having that community wealth building lens about how do we make sure that everything that we do as a council, all the investment decisions that we make, how does that fit through into a lens which is looking at changing the economy to work for people that we are elected to serve. So we have been looking at building huge amounts of council housing, for example, through a community wealth building lens. We want to make sure that actually that housing is built by local Ayrshire contractors such as Ashley, who have done a huge amount of work for us, that the jobs that they offer are actually well-paid, good jobs and actually provide a wage that allow people to sustain a minimum level of living. And also looking at the next great challenge that we face post-COVID, which is the climate challenge. So everything that we do as well has to connect with making sure that we reduce carbon and actually give our planet a second chance as well. So there is a huge amount of work, but I mean, I'm pretty confident and always positive about some of the changes that we can make. And if we don't return to business as usual and have the political will to make some of those changes, then we can make a difference.
Does anybody else have anything that they really want to say before we move on to Philippa's second song?
Well, I think is for, there is not to overlook the good that is happening, whether it's reorganisation, imagination, creativity, but also how communities have come together, as Joe talked about, and things that were considered pie in the sky before are suddenly, you know, they're on the agenda. I mean, even I saw a statistic, 44% of people worked from home during the crisis, up from 12%. Just thinking about that in relation to Joe's comment about the planet. So, you know, let's all not commute an hour to sit on a commuter desk, you know, to commute and sit in a desk with a computer and then commute an hour home. Let's actually be imaginative. So I think for people, it will pass. We will work our way through it. But we need to be imaginative, and we need to be supporting each other in doing that, and then hang on to as much of that good afterwards as we possibly can.
And I mean, just to build on that, I think my kind of end message would just be stick with it at the minute. We will beat the coronavirus. We will come out of the other side, but we all need to listen to the advice and the guidance that has been issued by people to us. So please just stick with it. I know it's very, very difficult being locked up. I understand that there's wider implications and consequences for that in terms of people's mental health and well-being. And if there is those issues, please speak to people, and people are there to help you through it. But it's only by actually working together and listening to the advice and guidance that we've got that we will beat the virus, and that we will do so as quickly as we possibly can. And we can lift some of the restrictions that we've got on people's lives at the minute, because I don't think any of us want to see the restrictions that we've got and our freedoms at the minute extended beyond any necessary level than what's actually required. So the more that we listen to the guidance and work through this, the quicker we'll get back to allowing people to live their sort of life and meet friends and family, and hopefully at some stage the grandparents will get to hold baby Caitlin in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, looking forward to that, I'm sure. Well, it's been great having you both, Joe and Philippa, with us this evening, and we wish you well. We thank you for all you're doing and all that you'll continue to do as servants of ourselves and the greater good and public. Philippa, you've got a positive song to go out on. What? Tell us a wee bit about it.
One Day Like This. It's just a song from Elbow. Throw the Curtains Wide. It just, you imagine it a bit like we've been really blessed with incredibly good weather for most of the lockdown. I think God is trying to help us through it, but there's just a positivity, the idea of waking up, throwing the curtains, sunshine coming in, and a beautiful day. And a little bit of it is treasuring that. So it's, you know, just one day like this a year. You know, we're not mindful. We're constantly living in the past and the future. And to me, it's about treasure the day you're actually having. And I think in the difficulties is treasure the nice things, the chatting to your mum by FaceTime, eating something nice with your family at home, getting out for a walk. We need to treasure the good things in all of this. And I would echo from Joe, please stay home, please take care and stay safe.
Well, thank you, and go well yourselves.
Urban Beat FM.
Yeah, well, yeah. That was lovely having Philippa and Joe. Really is. We're blessed to have public servants like them, who genuinely have a real heart for community and spiritual too, aware and alert to and concern for the needs of others, and building a society that's fairer and healthier.
And I often think that when somebody's in need, a holistic response is the most appropriate response. And it's the same in a situation like this. There are all different people who can contribute to the response to the coronavirus, but we need to work together. In other words, politics needs to work with local communities. Local communities need to work with churches. Churches need to work with health authorities. And the more we work together, then the more likely we are to create an appropriate response. The wonderful thing about working with Philippa and Joe is you get that sense that we can talk to one another, that you'll be listened to, that we will be in some sort of dialogue that allows each person to bring something to the table.
Yes. And we're going to listen to Deacon Blue. I was intrigued that you've been in. Did you say you were in Ricky Ross's house once?
Yeah, I visited Ricky's home. Yeah, I know. Rick, more Lorraine than Ricky, I would say, but yeah.
Yeah. And this is a song called Orphans. Ricky's a great wordsmith and tells good story, and this is quite a moving story called Orphans.
Urban Beats FM.
Did you ever listen to the Corrs?
Oh yeah, very much so. I remember them coming on the scene as well, Neil, and it was a different kind of music. You know, it had its own particular genre almost, and certainly a very kind of Irish characteristic, and somehow they seem to be able to break into the pop charts, but lovely, and it's great to open the horizons of your musical mind to something that's new and something that's different. And I think that's what our conversations today have been about with Philippa and Joe. You know, let's look at well-being and policies that bring well-being. Let's look at basic income and how basic income can be a method of making sure that things are better. Let's make sure that we open the horizons of our minds and heart to see things that really can make a difference. And when we're doing that in life, then we find that it's much more enjoyable. So the Corrs are going to entertain us with All the Love in the World.
Urban Beats FM.
Yeah, all the love in the world, and you know the yearning for someone who sees me, who gets me, who understands me. We yearn for that, yes, with a loved one, another human being. But God offers us that, doesn't He? There's a sense in which no one gets us and understands us like God does, and loves us.
Much more than anything or anyone else, you know, God absolutely understands who we are and knows all about us.
Yeah. And Alan McKinley is a local lad. He's now in the States, I think. He grew up in a local Baptist church, and he has been a worship leader for a number of years, and he's written some lovely songs. He's a great singer, and he's got this song called Love Is. So we're going to listen to that.
Urban Beats
FM. He's got a great sound, Alan. And we're thinking a bit more about love from a more humorous perspective. There's always this line about hitting your face like a big pizza pie.
That's amore, Neil. That has to be Dean Martin.
It has to be.
Yeah.
You got it.
Urban Beats FM.
Were you a Trekkie?
No, not at all. I was never into all the sci-fi stuff from Doctor Who forward. It wasn't something that really grabbed me. So I'm aware of it, and how could you not be growing up in our generation? But I was never, signed, sealed and delivered Trekkie. But I suspect perhaps you were.
Well, I was in the earlier days. I do confess to watching it as a youngster. I watched all the first several series, number of series, Kirk and Spock and company. I never get into the subsequent ones, but I did fondly remember. I do fondly remember watching Star Trek and going where no man has gone before. I was always intrigued what was going to happen next. And there was this song in '85, I think it was, the firm brought out. I think it was number one for a couple of weeks, and Star Trek across the universe. It's a kind of spitting images type humour. Only going forward, still can't find reverse. And there's a sense in which in the church, I think that's a wee bit like how we feel. There's this help my Bob. We're speeding forward at a terrible rate of knots. Change is happening left, right, and centre. Where are we? Where's it going to take us? As we boldly go where no church has gone before, or no man, woman has gone before. Certainly, I sense that in the Church of Scotland. It's interesting. Do you feel it within the Roman Catholic Church, Willie?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Our current Pope Francis has been a radical, and the thing about a radical is either you love the radical or you can't stand the radical, and sadly there's that kind of division within our own church. There are those who very much welcome and have been waiting for the changes that he's introducing, and those who are very much terrified. And again, the changes is introducing. So there's a sense of how will it all play out? You know, will they succeed in creating the kind of outward-looking church that, you know, many of us believe that we're meant to be? However, the world is changing very much, and coronavirus is making us press the pause button, isn't it? And making us reset, not forgetting the many wonderful things that are being done by others and have been done in the past, but also finding a way forward that allows us to respect human dignity, that allows us to protect our elders, that allows us to care for the earth. So whether we like it or not, we're going to have to face new realities. I suppose that's always been the case in the life of the church, but they're very much in our face just now. And the question is, are we listening to God? Are we receptive to what God's actions are at this time? Because it's very easy even to convince ourselves that God's getting it wrong, you know, that God doesn't understand something as complicated and as challenging as this. But nothing could be further from the truth. God's always ahead of the curve, always leading us, always showing us the way. So the challenge, I think, is not to revert back to the safe and the tried and the tested and assume that is the only way, but to be people of faith and listen to what God is saying to us and to allow God to take the lead in our lives. Because the one thing we can be sure of is that God is interested in what's best for us. And if we put our faith in him, then he will guarantee that we come to a good place. It might not be easy to get there. We might have to go through one or two atmospheres on the journey back home. But the beautiful thing is that God's love is a sure foundation.
Yeah. He's leading us through, and it's important to appreciate that technology is to serve the spreading of the love of God, to serve the message. It's not to become the media. Very easily the medium or the media becomes the message. But when we allow likes of virtual and remote technology to be a servant, it's amazing how the message is getting out to folk who were never coming to church. You know, there's folk coming to church who have never been in a church building before, but they're coming through the internet. And God's redeeming the internet in that respect. There's lots of bad news that can come through it, but there's lots of good news coming through it, and we've got to appreciate that and get with that. I think, you know, and sometimes I think there's a lot of our churches are feeling help. We're going at such a rate of knots, but we've got to get with it. We've got to be involved. You were talking about your masses going out remotely and through the internet, and that's good and that's great. It's interesting that it seems that dating agencies are in their statistics showing that, I think it was an eHarmony survey, they're kind of projecting that by 2035, 2037, there will be a tipping point where over 50% of people who are in relationship, are getting married, will have met through the internet. And there's people coming into connection with us, and we're getting into connection with people who are basically sizing up. They're testing. They're wondering, is this something that I'm willing to explore and want to find out more about? And hopefully there's lots of people who will be able to plug in as a result. Star Trekking. We know a man who knows how to save a life as well, but are we going to listen to Star Trekking first? Star Trekking first. Star Trekking, what a bit of humour, eh?
Just puts a smile on your face, doesn't it?
Yeah, and who and what are the Klingons that you've got in mind that we've got in the starboard bow? We better not name them.
We better not, no. So yeah. We've had a great show, Neil. The guest brought so much to the table about full employment and about job guarantee, about community wealth building, about there's so much to look forward to in this community, isn't there?
There is. And we don't know what it'll look like, but if we get people like Philippa and Joe that are helping lead, if we get people who are stepping up to the mark, like the people in the hub communities, neighbours looking out for each other, and if that's the direction that we're going, there's a lot of hope, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, there's a kind of apocalyptic picture in the Blade Runner film where the Blade Runner, or the kind of robotic human who behaves like a robot is programmed, actually shows at the end quite a dramatic evidence of humanity, and it's quite a moving film, I find. You either love it or hate it, I suppose. But the Vangelis music that goes to it is quite haunting as well. So we're going to listen to that, the end title of Blade Runner by Vangelis.
Urban Beat FM.
Fantastic. I love the way in Irvine there's a real sense of collaboration. People really not only know one another but work together, don't they?
I know, it's great. And we've got several ministries with people who have addiction issues on a Tuesday evening and a Friday evening, a teen challenge on a Tuesday evening, and grub and gospel on a Friday evening. And it's certainly been a challenge keeping up with these communities. Not all of them have phones. Not all of them have regular routines. And but we have been able to keep in touch with some of them. But it is really difficult. And it's interesting. The Fray, we're going to listen to How to Save a Life, and apparently this was born out of living with and working with troubled teenagers, and the attempt to get alongside a particular teenager that was troubled, and of course it's called How to Save a Life.
Urban Beat FM.
Fantastic. And it always strikes me as the sign of a healthy community that they can listen to one another. We're at our most unhealthy when we're not listening, and this is a time to listen. To listen to the gospel, to listen to the voice of God, to listen to the needs of those who are crying out for help, to listen to what other people can bring to the table. It really is a time for listening, because God's love is very much at work, even in places where people are not aware of it.
Yeah, and it's surprising. There's some beautiful surprises, I think, that are springing up, and people are being surprised by the kindness and the goodness and the help from maybe someone that has just ignored them previously. There's lots of negative stuff too, but being able to home in the positive is helpful, I think. Well, it's been another good show for us anyway. We don't know about you listeners, but we look forward next week we're hoping to have some people from the National Health Service who are involved in the front line, hoping to have some of them with us as guests next Sunday night. So join us then if you can. And we're going to go out to Jesus Your Name, Margaret Becker, Kristen Getty, and Joanne Hogg. This is a lovely song of blessing. Just let the love and light of Jesus shine brightly upon you. Bye, Willie.
Bye, Neil. Take care.
You too. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.
Love local.